It's wonderful to see all of you here, and I thank you for supporting CAP. I want to thank my longtime friend Ted Strickland, who was a brilliant governor, a great congressman, and a terrifically brave public servant, who, like every other person who was in the Congress with me in 1933, I'm old. Ted Strickland can say that if it hadn't been for him, I would have been an abject failure because our economic plan reversing trickle-down economics passed by one vote in both houses. So thank you very much, Governor Strickland. It's hard not to hate Ted Strickland, actually, because he's older than I am and looks 20 years younger, but I forgive him, and I'm glad to be here. I'm very proud of Neera Tanden. She was 6 years old when she introduced me in 1992. And you know, I know John Podesta founded CAP, and he's a workaholic and everything, but Neera is far more willing than Podesta to do whatever, and I mean whatever it takes. I finally realized this, what her X factor was, one night when I was home alone and Hillary was out doing something else, and I turned on the television, I started channel surfing, and there she was on Bill Maher's show. Anybody with enough guts to go on Bill Maher, as far as I'm concerned, deserves a lifetime tenure at a progressive job. I want to thank my friend John Podesta for the work he did here to build this organization and for his service in the White House under me and now his service for President Obama, for his friendship and for being the Energizer Bunny of good ideas, who not only comes up with them but can figure out how to implement them. We're all looking forward to what happens in the next couple of years. I want to say to all of you here supporting CAP, I made a few notes because of what Neera mentioned earlier. I gave the second of a series of lectures at my alma mater, Georgetown, that they asked me to put together over a 2-year period, 3 or 4 talks about how to compose a life in public service, whether you're in politics or government service or working for an NGO or in the private sector, taking time trying to do things that advance the public interest. And in the first talk, I said, it seems to me there are 4 things that are really important. You've got to be obsessively interested in people. And you need to be interested in them as individuals and not just as some collective body. I always thought that's one of the things that got President Nixon in trouble. I think he really cared about America as a whole. And he was a flat-out communist compared to the crowd running his party today. But he had a hard time thinking about flesh and blood people and relating to them and how these things would affect them. President Putin seems to care about Russia. I think he, in his own mind, is a great Russian patriot, but he's more concerned about the country in the aggregate than the effect of his policies on the individual lives of Russians or Ukrainians. People matter. Think when you walk out of here tonight, you passed, when you came in, did you see all the people getting ready, getting all the food ready? When you go back out, just look at them and wonder how many of them can never afford to come to an event like this. When you complain, as I complain every single day, about the fact that there are almost 50 million of our fellow Americans who vote every time we have a presidential election and fail to vote every time we have a midterm election. And we got to do something about that. And I thank the president for giving the DNC the technical capacity to do something about it in most states, but it's harder for them than it is for most of us. And that needs to be what we keep in mind. If we have a people-centered politics, we'll get to a better place. The second thing is what CAP's about. Policy matters. You can have all the rhetoric in the world, and if you don't know what you want to do, and you don't keep working on it till it makes sense, and testing it against people who may not agree with you, you won't get to good policy. When I came here, actually, I got made fun of for the first year or so I was in office. They said, what's Bill Clinton's, he's the president, why is he involved in all these details of the budget? Duh, we had quadruple the debt of the country in the previous 12 years, and they wanted to know why I was involved in the details of the budget. One of my staff members, whom I adore, so I won't identify the person, talked about how we ought to just slash all these farm programs. And I said, you know, I know a lot of the people that get these programs. And some of them are too generous to big farmers. Some of them keep individual farmers alive. And the original purpose of the farm program was to help protect family farmers from bad years, bad weather years, unanticipated spikes in the price of inputs, unanticipated declines in the price of the crop. And I said, we're going to cut these things, but we shouldn't enjoy doing it if we know we're going to have to hurt people. So policy matters. And then politics matters because you've got to be able to turn your good ideas into real changes in people's lives, and that's where politics comes in. And the fourth thing that matters is, what is the purpose of all this? And I always say, you know, when it's all said and done, and for me it pretty much is. I mean, I show up when other people ring the bell, but I'm not running for anything anymore. And I can tell you, as I look back on what I did, you'd be surprised and maybe concerned about my mental stability if I told you the details of the things I tried to do when I was Attorney General of my state. But the reason is this: when it's all said and done, there's only three things that matter. Are people better off when you quit than when you started? The children have a brighter future? And are we coming together instead of being torn apart? If you can answer yes to those three things, the rest of it's all background music, and how great or small you are depends on largely the circumstances in which you find yourself. And so that's why we need CAP. I can't tell you how much I rely on their research and how much help we've gotten over the years. When I gave this talk at Georgetown on policy, I was trying to make the argument that there's a certain level of cynicism in the way economics is covered. That if you get a good economy, you're lucky. If you get a bad economy, you're unlucky. Whatever happens, happens. And the politicians take credit for things they had nothing to do with and get blamed for things they had nothing to do with. It's all a roll of the dice. That feeds cynicism. Now, I don't know anybody who's ever held public office who claimed 100% credit for economic success. Nor do I know anybody who's 100% to blame for economic failure. Herbert Hoover didn't cause the Depression, but he was responsible for what he chose to do or not do about it. So the main point of the Georgetown talk was to say that I was tired of hearing that income inequality had been increasing unabated in the United States since the late 70s, because in the 8 years I served, it's the only period since the late 70s when all quintiles of the American economy showed substantial gains. Now, all but the lowest quintile did in Reagan's 8 years, although lower than ours. But the bottom quintile increased their income 0.7%. The top quintile, 23.5%. In our 8 years, the top quintile increased their incomes 21%. The bottom quintile, 23.5%. That is not an accident. That is policy. So this inequality debate we're having today is very important. But it's important to recognize that reducing inequality is a noble goal, because too much inequality is a severe constraint on growth. It is here, and it is all over the world. The most comfortable people in society should be obsessed with increasing middle-class incomes and increasing social mobility so more poor people move into the middle class, because it's a severe constraint on our collective growth. I just was in Canada a couple of days ago, just 2 days after the report came out saying that Canada now might be the most prosperous middle-income country in the world. They may have, their middle quintile may have surpassed America's in disposable income. It's important. And so is fiscal responsibility. But they both require something over and above investment, adequate tax revenues, adequate spending controls on things we need to cut. They require a certain level of growth. You have to have a strategy in an open economy like ours, where you have 4% of the world's people and you got 20% of the world's income. If you want to keep it, you got to sell something to somebody else. And you have to sell it on terms that work to benefit you as well as your trading partners. And that's why the work Cap's done in energy and infrastructure is so important. When I was president, information technology spread throughout the economy. That would have happened if one of you had been president. Whether you would have done as much as we did to accelerate it and to spread the benefits of it is another thing, but that happened. I didn't do that. And it was 8% of our employment, but over 20% of our new jobs and about 30% of our income growth. What happens? When you change the job mix, if you also create a lot of jobs, then you have tighter labor markets and median income goes up and inequality goes down. That's what America has to do again. That's policy. And the thing I love about CAP is when they do this research and they give you the information they give, and they put it in the hands of our members of Congress, our governors, our candidates for other offices around the country, believe it or not, real voters who are often treated like they're two-dimensional cardboard cutouts with a single-digit IQ, they appreciate it because they're living with the economy we say we're concerned about, far more than I am. They understand if they work for a company with 40 employees where the owner of the company has desperately succeeded in maintaining health care coverage over the last 12 years, where until the signing of the Affordable Care Act, inflation was going up at 3 times the overall rate of inflation. They understand that a lot of those employers never gave them a raise because they were keeping their health care coverage at a level they could afford that would enable them to provide for their children in a decent way. And so I think that it is a colossal error to be afraid to discuss policy with the American people, or to think they don't care, or to think they can't get it. I think it's a terrible mistake for people who voted for the health care bill to run away from it. You know, let me just say, it's true most of the coverage was about how bad the rollout was in the individual insurance market. You know what percentage of the people are in the individual insurance market? About 10. You know that half the people in the individual insurance market are in and out in a year, they're just between jobs? And this whole business about you can keep the policy if you like it, the president said, and the law reflects, that nobody has to get rid of any policy that is operative at the time the law is signed. But insurance companies, with the support of state regulators, make sure that 80% of the policies in the individual market don't last more than 2 years anyway. And he did not promise to take over the insurance industry or to take over the state regulation. So what have you got? You got 3.5 million people between 21 and 26 on their parents' policies. You've got another 4 or 5 million people when it plays out in the Medicaid expansion. You've got 8 million people enrolling in the marketplaces, of which at least 6 are new enrollees. You've got a $10 billion savings already for seniors in closing the Medicaid drug loophole, the Medicare drug loophole. You've got almost 100 million people who now get preventive services in their health policies. You've got 100 million people with pre-existing conditions that now can't be discriminated against in the extension of the deal. I think you can trust the American people to figure out it'd be far better to fix what's wrong with this bill than to keep trying to repeal it. And I think that's what we ought to say. And from a purely economic point of view, when President Obama signed that bill, for example, we were spending 17.8% of GDP on health care. You know what the next most expensive system was in a large, wealthy country? France at 11.8, Germany at 11.5, and they generally are viewed as the best systems in the world in terms of quality and impact. We never ranked higher than 25 in the last 10 years in these analyses in terms of overall impact. What's the difference given our current GDP in 11.8 and 17.8? $1 trillion a year. Now, I'd like to reform the corporate tax system and get that $1 trillion that's overseas back here and put a lot of it into an infrastructure bank and put America back to work, and that's one of the things that we've talked about. I think it's a great idea. But let me remind you, that's a one-time $1.2 trillion pot of money, most of which would probably like to come back to America now because energy costs are low, labor productivity is high. Every year you do manufacturing, labor is a smaller and smaller percentage of the total, and energy and materials and transportations are a higher percentage. I'd like to do that. But the healthcare thing offers a promise, if we could close the gap between ourselves and our competitors, of $1 trillion a year in savings. Even if we just close 3/4 of the gap, it's $750 billion a year. There are things in this bill which changed us from a system that pays for procedure to a system that pays for performance, that over the long run, if we stay at this and we work at it and we all get together, can do it. That's policy. Just like it was policy that moved 100 times as many people out of poverty into the middle class in the 8 years I served as compared with the Reagan years. We only had 50% more jobs, but 100 times as many people. That's policy. That's what CAP is for. And I believe it's the best way to reduce cynicism among voters. And that's the only other thing I want to tell you, that particularly young people who are here. Former governor of New York, Mario Cuomo, the father of the current governor, who served in my cabinet, and I'm proud of him, but Mario Cuomo was a great orator. And he once said, "We govern in prose, though we campaign in poetry." Sometimes when young people get drawn into the public arena and get enthusiastic about politics, they fall in love with the poetry. And any one of us who's ever run has tried to get them to. That's why I used the Fleetwood Mac song, "Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow," when I ran for president. But you can't forget the prose. I read the other day where somebody said, well, maybe America wasn't so smart fighting for the independence of South Sudan because look at how they blew it and they're fighting with each other. Maybe it wasn't such a great thing that we opened up the most closed military dictatorship in the world in Myanmar because they only made peace with 17 of the armed insurrections they had, and they are still mistreating the Rohingya Muslims, which they are, and I don't like it. And I've been there, and I'm trying to help. What's the point of all this? When you get into this, if you expect poetry every day, you're going to be disappointed. In 1918, the great German sociologist Max Weber said, politics is a long and slow boring of hard boards. You got to keep pushing the rock up the hill. But you got to keep pushing the right rock up the right hill. Once you decide what rock you want to push and what hills you're willing to climb, then you have to keep at it. That's what this unbelievable group helps us do. I love CAP. I love policy. Because it's only through policy that our occupying whatever positions we occupy in the political spectrum can have meaning in people's lives. So I ask you to keep supporting them. I ask you to keep believing that you're pushing the right rock up the right hill. And I ask you not to get discouraged. We are living in a period which for you, particularly the younger people here, should be the most exciting, interesting, peaceful period in human history with more progress. If we can solve the inequality problem, if we can minimize the instability of all these identity-based conflicts, such as that we're seeing the Ukrainians suffer through now, and if we can both mitigate and roll back the threats of climate change and the destruction of local resources, it will be. But I would be shocked if there's ever a period when you never have a bad headline in the morning news. Power is too diffuse. Influence and access to technology is too widespread. The only way to make it come out all right is for you to stay active and keep supporting CAP. Thank you very much.